When my son was accidentally electrocuted, all I wanted were mother's stories. I wanted to know it was possible for my heart to be whole again. I wanted to know I could trust life again. And there was nothing. There was nothing written. I searched and searched. And I found books on grief and the technical parts of grief and the reasons why you had to grieve. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I needed stories. And I was keeping a journal during this process because I'm a hopeless journal keeper. I've been keeping journals for 30 years. And the book I most wanted to read that hadn't been written yet, I found 18 years later I had written in my journals, and that's how Healing Grief, A Mother's Story came about. I often tell people that grief does give us the opportunity to heal. I also want to say that as a mother, what I know is that a whole, H-O-L-E, will forever be part of my wholeness. That the pain is different, and I have experienced healing and certainly an understanding of death that I would never have even imagined had it not been for my son's death. And in terms of my human heart, there's a whole that's part of who I am now. That initially I thought it would be possible to recover and have a heart that was whole. 20 years have gone by now, and what I can say is that was an illusion. I want to remind everyone here that grief itself is a stressor. It's demanding. It makes physical demands upon us. It makes emotional demands. It makes social demands. It makes spiritual demands. And grief can also be a teacher. The most important part of grieving is to remember it's a transitional behavior. And we're grieving not only the past and the present that we had with the person who died, but also the future, the dreams, the promises, the life not lived. And it's very much like grief is a holistic process. And the way we learn about grief is through our families. So we learn how to grieve. We each have our unique grief models built in to ourselves. So we watch our families, we watch our parents, we watch our grandparents, we watch what our culture says is permissible about grief, and we adapt. So what's really essential to know is that everyone grieves differently, and that grief has its own timing, and that it will call upon you to surrender. So you may have to surrender to emotions. And the thing about emotions that most people don't realize, and that I wished I had known when I was going through the grieving process, is that emotions have a function. So the function of anger is to mobilize us, is to move us, is to move us into action. The function of grief is sadness, to discharge sadness, and really to review your past and your memories of the person who no longer resides in this dimension. The function of love is to give us the courage to connect and reinvest again. So all these emotions are essential to the grieving process. And oftentimes what will happen in the grief process is emotions that we're used to experiencing one at a time, like sadness or love or pain or resignation or shame, cascade. So they're all in a jumble, and we can't sort them out. And that's the overwhelming part of grief. And sometimes what we'll do is we'll numb ourselves to that process. And what's really called for is simply to surrender. Not only does grief create stress in terms of our physical well-being, it also creates stress in terms of our social identity. For example, for me, when my son died, I had a very strong identification as a mother of a teenager. And I went to track meets and swim meets and basketball tournaments. And when Mike died, it was over. I didn't do that anymore. I wasn't a mother of a growing teenage boy. So that all the parts of my life that were identified for me as mother of a teenage boy were extinguished. And so that role identity is there. If it's a parent who died, or if it's the second parent who died, the identification as daughter and son is also not there any longer. And that creates another need to expand identification. So a lot of the isolation that people feel during a grief process is due to the social role identity. There's a sense of isolation because oftentimes people that you did things with are no longer part of the circle.